Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today is going to be another unsolved mystery. The unsolved case I will be covering today is the yogurt shop murders. Now, just a little disclaimer, this does involve 4 young teenage girls. There is so much detail involved in this case and so many people. It gets very nutty, so bear with me as we are evolving throughout this case. I hope I can shine some light onto this unsolved mystery and really hope that one day whoever did this will be arrested and charged. Just remember that this is just based off of things that I have found, articles, videos, documentaries that I have found regarding this case, and it's just for educational and entertainment purposes only. So with that being said, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel and like this video. Leave a comment if you want, and buckle your seatbelts because it's about to get really bumpy up in here. Let's get started. Ugh. My headband is so gross, so I apologize. It needs to be washed. As always, I'm going to start off with the ordinary serums. On December 6, 1991, 4 teenage girls were brutally murdered in the town of Austin, Texas. They were murdered inside of a yogurt shop called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt. Amy Ayers was the youngest of the 4, who was 13 years old. She was born on January 31st in 1978. Amy was a huge country music fan. She loved George Strait. He was her fave. And she rode horses since she was about 3 years old, and she was a natural fit into the FFA. The FFA is the Future Farmers of America Association. You will come to learn that all 4 girls were actually very involved in this FFA program. Amy attended Barnett Middle School and was best friends with a girl named Sarah, but they didn't really get to see each other that often because they went to different schools. So whenever they got the chance to hang out, they really took advantage of it. I'm gonna use the e.l.f. Poreless Primer Eye Cream, and I'm only putting that on my eyelid today. Eliza Thomas was 17 years old. She was born on May 16th, 1974. She recently just transferred to Lanier High School. She transferred so she can get more involvement in the school's FFA. I'm going in with the white e.l.f. Poreless Primer, e.l.f. Poreless Eye Primer, and just putting that right into my crease. I used this for the first time earlier. I really do like the cream color better. This one is just a lot more, it's harder to blend out. So I did get a little bit on my lid, but that's okay. And I guess it wanted to go there as well. That's completely okay. We are going to go over with some shadows, so don't even worry about it. Now, Eliza was very focused on being in the FFA because she dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, and she thought this was the best way to go about it.
I look crazy.
She was in the school's welding class and their agricultural mechanical program. Next was Jennifer Harbison. She was 17 years old and born on May 9th, 1974. She was a senior at Lanier High School. We are just sticking with the Morphe and James Charles palette today. I'm going to dip into the color B. It's the very bright yellow color. we're going to pack that on here. Now, Jennifer was president of the school's FFA chapter. She ran for her school's track team. She was on the student council board. Her classmates described her as like a go-getter. She was never afraid to say what was on her mind. She was never scared to say how she felt about something. And she wasn't scared to cover it up with just like a funny, corny joke either. We're going into the color 518 now, which is the bright orange, and that's going right next to the yellow. Sarah was a very fierce volleyball and basketball player, and she was also part of the junior varsity cheerleading squad. Next up, we're going into your kidding. Don't worry about blending right now. Just get those colors on. Now, Austin, Texas was described as its own little bubble. You go down to Texas, everything's bigger in Texas, but Austin was a smaller community where people would settle down, raise their family, and that's what type of town it was. Now, to begin that night, friends Jennifer and Eliza went to work at the yogurt shop. I can't believe it's not butter. I can't believe it's yogurt shop. And the two girls who were friends, Sarah and Amy, went and had a night out and hung out at the nearby mall. They had plans to meet up with Sarah's sister Jennifer at the yogurt shop after, they were done hanging out or whatever. They were supposed to catch a ride from her to get a ride home. All four girls decided to have a giant sleepover that night. I think I'm gonna go in with the shade Love That for the outer corner. Okay, now I'm gonna take a little bit of Love That and on one side of my brush and on the other, dip into Your Kidding. And we're gonna go back and forth in between both colors right here, just to get them to blend together a little better. Just like that. Apparently, it was quite normal to close the shop that they worked at about like 10 minutes early, and they didn't close the shop up until like 11 o'clock at night. I think that's like really late. Is that just me? Like, I remember hanging out at the mall and the shop's closing up at like 8 o'clock. 11 o'clock is just like way too late, and it's way past my adult bedtime. Now we're gonna go into the B and 518 and do the same thing with the yellow and the orange. Just marrying those two colors together. And then I'll go back in with the red and the orange as well. Skip that one. I'm gonna go in with the fluffy brush and just kind of go over the edge here. And then they would leave like a few minutes after 11 o'clock. I'm going in with the Makeup Revolution Blur Stick. I love this primer, guys, but the applicator is just very uncomfortable for me. Multiple witnesses have come forward about a small group of men, or what seemed to be men, they couldn't really see their faces, inside the shop. And Daryl Croft, a security officer, had stopped by to pick up some yogurt, and he saw a very fidgety young man in the shop, and he was like offering his spot to line to multiple people. And then he was very concerned about Daryl being a police officer. He kept looking at the car, and then he would turn around and he was like, "Are you a police officer?" And Daryl had to insist that he was not. And what was very strange was that when he got up to the counter, "Can I have a soda? You're in a yogurt shop and you're getting a soda?" I'm gonna go in with the e.l.f. Camo CC Cream. We're just gonna dot that and then blend it with a beauty sponge. After the boy got his soda, he proceeded to the back of the yogurt shop, and I will put a picture in the video so you guys will be able to see the setup of the shop. So going to the back of the shop was like not possible for customers without the girls' permission that were working. Now, as a witness, Daryl could only give details regarding that he had a very big nose, deep voice, and he was wearing like a green military style jacket. Now, after locking the door, no other customers were able to get into the shop. So they had a couple who were just finishing up and the two boys at a table nearby. There was also a woman who said that when she came in, there were teenage boys sitting near the front of the register. She referred to the boys as hoodlums. So their hair was very unkempt. They looked to be Hispanic in her opinion. And she just remembered just feeling uneasy and uncomfortable around them. So when she came in, she just hurried up, got her yogurt, and left. Jennifer was said to have picked up Amy and Sarah at around 9 when she was taking her break. And then she returned to the yogurt shop to finish closing up. Eliza's mother stopped by the shop at around like 9:30, and she would do this regularly just to check on the girls, make sure they didn't need anything. And once she felt like the girls were okay, she would grab some yogurt and head on home. Now, witnesses say that Jennifer went and grabbed some pizza too within the strip that they worked at, and that was before 10 o'clock. So she would have had to go pick up the girls, come back, pick up the pizza, and then return to the shop. And multiple witnesses said that they all saw the girls hanging out inside the shop eating the pizza in like the dining area of the yogurt shop. A couple came to the shop at around 10:30 and said that there were a few people that looked like young men sitting next to the cash register, and they were all wearing like very big oversized jackets and hoodies, and you weren't able to see their faces at all. So the fact that they couldn't even tell if they were men or not. The last actual sale on the register was at 10:42 that evening. The couple that I just spoke about remembered leaving the shop at 10:47, remembering that they saw the girls tidying up and cleaning up the counters and picking up the chairs, and that the only table that still had chairs sitting were the table with the men at it. No one actually told the officers, though, that they saw Amy or Sarah. It was just assumed that the girls were in the back eating pizza when the other two were starting to clean up. I'm going to take my NYX Born to Glow concealer. I am in the shade Vanilla. I'm almost out. While out patrolling, Officer Gay would notice that there was some smoke coming from the back of the building. And when he called in to report it, they assumed that it was a small kitchen fire because of the location. A firefighter who responded to the call after she arrived remembered that there was no lights on and that there was a closed sign in the door. So they assumed that nobody was inside of the building at the time of the flame. She also said that the place was full of black smoke, which meant that you couldn't see anything inside of the building from the outside. The firefighters categorized it as a 2-alarm fire, which meant that the fire was pretty much able to be contained, and it wasn't large enough, even though there was a lot of smoke, it wasn't large enough to where it was going to spread to the other shops in the strip. They were able to break into the front door and start to put out the fire. And when they started to diminish the fire, they were then able to see to the back of the building. He said that at one point they noticed something through the back doorway and it looked to be a foot. They would soon discover after this the bodies of the 4 teenage girls. Now at this point, the crime scene was completely destroyed. It was saturated by water and it was obviously torched by flames. It was completely contaminated. Walking through the unlocked back door, they assumed this was the murderer's point of exit. At that point, they would find 2 bodies lying on top of each other. These were the bodies of Eliza and Sarah. Now lying next to them was the body of Jennifer, and in the next room was Amy. I'm gonna take my airspun powder and just set my whole face, especially my under eyes. The bodies were burned so badly that the only thing that they were able to tell just by looking at the bodies was that they were female. All 4 girls were unclothed, and Sarah's body was under Eliza, and her hands were bound with underwear. She was gagged. She seemed to have been raped, and Eliza was lying on top of Sarah in the same condition. All 3 of these girls that were in that room were severely burned. Now, Amy was the only girl found in a different location than the other girls. I'm going in with the Physicians Formula Matte Butter Bronzer, and we're just going to bronze the face up, bringing it back to life. Now, Amy wasn't nearly burned as bad as the other girls were. She was only burned about 30% of her body. She had a cloth around her neck, and she was shot in the head twice. One bullet appeared to miss her brain, which this might have kept her alive a little longer than the other girls for at least a brief moment, where she may have had a chance to try to escape. But unfortunately, Amy was then shot again, causing her severe brain damage. I'm gonna dip into the shade Code James in the palettes, the bigger orange one, and we're gonna use that as blush. Police believe that the murderers stacked all 4 bodies on top of one another and then started the fire. They believe that Amy was stacked between Jennifer and Eliza, and at an attempt to escape, she would push Jennifer's body off her and try to crawl away, but unfortunately, they did catch her and shot her, and she did not make it out alive. Her injuries were so incredibly horrific that she ended up passing away right after the firefighters got there and started fighting the blaze. The scene was so horrific that police and firefighters were like choking up, talking to the media, and eventually the news would break that it was 4 teenage girls inside of the shop at the time of the blaze. They were able to identify all the girls pretty much by the 2 cars that were in the parking lot, dental records. Now, I hope you guys are okay because that's a lot of information to take in. It's not even close to being over. I'll probably finish my makeup before we are even done talking about the case. That's okay, I'll hang out. But if you need one, I suggest to take a break. It does not get prettier from here, I promise. You're about to go on a roller coaster of emotions. Continuing on, most of the evidence was completely destroyed, whether it was by the fire, by water, it was destroyed. They were able to get a DNA sample after an autopsy, but that wasn't until years later. And that's pretty much when they discovered that the girls had actually been raped. We're gonna stick with the same color range. I'm gonna start here though and bring it this way. So we're gonna start with that purple. Knock off the extra. I know these colors are very powdery. Dip into that, and we're going to just clean up the edge here. Then we're going to continue that pattern by dipping into your kidding, patting into that purple to get them to kind of blend together. So police started saying that the underlying reason for the murder was the robbery. Which I don't know why you would want to rob a yogurt shop, but I guess if you really needed to, you would. They did confirm that the register was robbed after counting the drawer and auditing it, and discovered that there was about $540 taken from the register itself, and there was a no sale rung up after the store had closed and the last customers have said they left. There was also cleaning stuff all over the shop as well, so because they weren't put back to where they belong, they assumed that the robbery erupted while the girls were cleaning up the shop. The fire's origin was, I'm going in with my makeup spray, my setting spray here, just reset there. And then I'm gonna go back in with my beauty sponge and just pat over that just to melt all the powder we just used together. So the fire's origin was in the back of the shop where the three girls were found. At about 11:42, they said the fire must have started. So that's about 40 minutes of just like pure torture that these girls had to deal with. And I can't even imagine like being that young and being scared for your freaking life. The fire was so freaking hot that the girls' bodies were actually melting to the floor of the shop, and their teeth had begun burning at this point. So it's pretty surprising that they were even able to contain the fire like they did when they arrived before it engulfed the entire strip mall. The back door of the shop was left unlocked, so they believe that it was probably propped open, and that's how the robbers or killers, whatever, had escaped the yogurt shop. I'm going in with an e.l.f. highlighter in the shade Moonlight Pearls, using my beauty blender and putting it at the high points. There were cups that were full of lighter fluid next to the girls, and police believe that whoever did this wasn't their first time starting a fire, because they also went through the entire shop to grab pretty much anything that was flammable, the cups, the plates, the bowls, whatever they could find. They threw it on top of the girls and lit it on fire. Doing this, they would ensure that the girls definitely caught on fire. The people of Austin were completely shook at this point. They were pissed off. They were upset. They didn't know how to really handle it, but they wanted to find these people as soon as possible, and so did police. In order to do this, the police really had to dig into the girls' lives and just rip it apart pretty much, trying to find anybody that held some sort of grudge, whether it was an old friend, an ex-boyfriend, somebody who had a hate towards the family, anything. They tried to find any little thing in their lives that would just spark something. But these girls were the definition of perfect. They had no enemies. They were well liked in the community. They gave back to the community, and they were just outstanding teenagers, pretty much. So with this, they could assume safely that the connection between the suspects and the girls were zero, and that it was just a random, heinous crime. So like any other murders or anything like that, they're gonna look at the people that are closest to them first. So they looked at Jennifer's boyfriend, and they pretty much squashed that real quick. They were able to clear him. They did find his DNA at the scene, but he did have an alibi, and that was pretty much tossed out the window. This murder robbery was all over the media. Investigators knew that they had to take some sort of step in order to preserve the case itself and any evidence that they found. So they didn't want a plethora of like false confessions, as we do see in these type of cases, people trying to cut deals if they're in trouble, that sort of nature. So they had to go to a judge, try to get something, anything pretty much sealed of what they could in order to preserve the case itself. So a judge ruled that the autopsy itself could remain sealed, that if they had somebody in questioning, only the killer and the police would know the facts of the autopsy report. In the months before this robbery took place, the local shop owners that were also in that strip said that there was a string of robberies going on, and that they were actually so scared, some of them, they put bars on the windows, and they felt like the yogurt shop was targeted because it was so late, and it was probably the only shop that was open at the moment. Eventually, with FBI's help, they were able to profile these killers, and they said that one of the suspects had no plan of the crime. It was very unorganized. They had to know the area very well because they escaped relatively quick. They didn't believe that they would attack again. They thought that this was an isolated incident, and it was just a desperate attempt of a robbery gone terribly wrong. And they also said that they thought they would be under the influence of a narcotic like cocaine or something along that nature. Now they knew they were looking for at least two people, one of those being or coming off as like the alpha of the two, and the other one kind of like a follower. They think that one of them convinced the other one to commit the robbery at least, and when it started to unfold, also convinced them to do or help within the murders as well. They believe that this follower person, quote unquote, would eventually come forward after police going to the media, etc., to admit what he has done and kind of throw the other person under the bus. So I'm going to take some more of that highlighter. I'm going to highlight my nose a little more, my lips. A few days after the murder and the fire, police arrested a man named Maurice Pierce. He was carrying around a fully loaded unlawful weapon at the mall, and they noticed that it was the same type of gun that was used to shoot the girls at the yogurt shop. Now, Maurice and his friend Forrest said that they were most likely at the mall that night because that's where they always hung out, and they were probably with their two other friends, that was Michael and Robert, and that's only because they were always with them. Boys gave very promising details. Even Maurice, who admitted that it was the same gun that was used to kill the girls in the yogurt shop, but at the time of the murder, he had let his friend Forrest borrow the gun. And the next day, him, Maurice, and their 2 other friends stole a car, ran away from Austin for a few days, and when Michael, his other friend, was asked about this, he also admitted his part in the robbery and murder as well. So they eventually had the boys take polygraph tests and wanted them to tell the story of that night from start to end. And both boys, Maurice and Forrest, passed with flying colors and were eventually released. The investigator involved in this case was under a lot of heat. His name was Hector Polanco, and he was considered pretty much an egotistical prick in the interrogations, pretty much playing the bad cop every single time in the good cop, bad cop scenario. And he would do anything and everything just to get a confession. Other boys had actually come forward and had said that the cops would show up at weird hours of the night and force them to go down to the police building or the police station just to be questioned for an ungodly amount of hours, and that this guy would be yelling at them, telling them that they knew who did this and that they just didn't want to rat him out, or they did it themselves, and that they were going to be arrested for capital murder. Eventually, he was kicked off the case. So many people were suspects, and very few were actually arrested, but eventually they were all let go. They really had no idea who done it at this point. Pretty much brought back to point zero every single time. In 1992, the Mexican government made a statement saying that they had arrested 2 of 3 suspects that were involved in kidnapping and rape of a young woman, and that one of the suspects resembled the yogurt shop killer. After this guy's arrest for that crime, he would ultimately confess to the yogurt shop killing. And do you think that that would be the end of it? No. After he confessed, he would later state that he was tortured and that the police made him confess to those murders. So where does that lead us? That leaves us with 2 confessions and absolutely no arrest for this disgusting crime. They questioned about 1,200 people and had about 5,000 tips that poured in, but yet nobody was arrested. They rearranged the task force for this numerous times, bringing new eyes every single time, new minds, just to see if something would pop up to somebody else that didn't necessarily pop up before. Every time they created a new task force, the evidence and everything would be reorganized. And by the 3rd time they created a new task force, they would again question the 4 boys that were now men at this time, who were married, had girlfriends, had lives of their own, jobs, children, whatever. Michael said now he had no involvement in this, but wanted to help investigators as much as he could with finding out who did it. I'm gonna go in with the Sky High mascara by Maybelline. This was so hyped on TikTok, and honestly, it's just another mascara to me. I did line the outer half of my eye with a magnetic mascara, a magnetic eyeliner. Now, Michael was interrogated for 18 hours that day, and it was all under video surveillance. Eventually, he made a handwritten confession, but that wasn't recorded. Suspicious? I don't know. They next questioned Robert, who also said he had no involvement in this. After 5 hours of being interrogated, He admitted that he was involved and also made a written statement. But yet again, the recording of this was very sketchy. The audio was barely audible, like you can barely hear what anybody was saying, and only about 3 hours of his interrogation was recorded. Next up was Forrest, and he, like everybody else, denied everything. They ended up talking him into going to the yogurt shop just to see if anything would click. And he was like, no, I don't have anything to do with this. But eventually, they ended up bringing in Robert, who pretty much put his hand on his shoulder and was like, dude, we admitted to everything, just let it go. Tell it what it is, and let's move on with our lives. But Forrest was not having it. He was like, nah, man, fuck that. I didn't have anything to do with this. Without Forrest and Maurice Pierce confessing to this case, police believe that they still had enough substantial evidence to arrest all 4 men with the murder of Amy Ayers, Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Jennifer Harbison. So in court, police would testify that the 4 cased the yogurt shop, leaving the back door propped open so they had easy access inside. Maurice and Forrest said that they came up with this plan to rob the yogurt shop for just a quick source of income, and the other 2 boys had agreed that this was the best way to go about robbing a place. Forrest Wellborn had decided to stay in the car to allow the guys an easy getaway, to be like an easy escape out of the yogurt shop. And Maurice and Robert Springsteen were both armed with guns, Maurice with a 22 and Robert with a 38. Michael Scott said that Robert was the one who made the girls get undressed and asked his help to blindfold them. Maurice only got $12 out of the register, and this fumed him. He began to panic, asking where all the money was, and out of a desperate attempt to come up with more money, he did shoot one of the girls. Robert then raped one of the girls and told Michael that he better do the same to the other girl, but Michael was not about it. He really didn't want to, and he did try to fake it, but nobody was believing it. Ultimately, he ended it with shooting one of the other girls after Maurice or whoever told him to. Michael Scott told prosecutors how he saw Amy try to get away from them, and Robert had caught her and had shot her for yet a second time. At this point, all 4 girls were dead, and these boys were just caught in a whirlwind of a mess. So what better way to cover up a crime than to start another crime and light it all on fire? That's what they thought. They admitted to running away from Austin for a few days, stealing vehicles, and disposing of one of the guns in a nearby river somewhere. Many details of all the boys' confessions who did confess were very similar, and some details weren't even told to the public and were only addressed in the confessions. So police really thought that they had their guys. Robert Springsteen was indicted on December 14th, 1999, and he was indicted on 4 counts of murder. That's for Amy, Sarah, Eliza, and Jennifer. And prosecutors were seeking the death penalty for him. And for Maurice, they were only able to seek life in prison because at the time of the murder, he was yet a juvenile. In May of 2000, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms stated that the weapon Maurice was arrested with from the mall was not the weapon that was used in the murder. Why it took them 9 years to say so, I don't know. I don't. So the police decided that they should go look for the other gun that was said tossed into the river, but it's been like almost a decade. They had no chance in finding that, which they didn't. So they finally thought that they had a chance at closing this case and giving peace to those in Austin. But soon enough, a photo would erupt all over media of a police officer holding a gun to one of the boys' heads. And even more problems came about after this exposure, and it was about the expert who said that the gun that Pierce was arrested for wasn't the weapon used in the murder, had actually known this for over a year or so before the men were arrested. When people asked him, like, why didn't you say anything? He pretty much said that he just forgot to say something. Hot mess. But it didn't stop there, guys. It didn't stop there. The DNA that was found at the crime scene matched none of the men. Because all the guys said that Wellborn was pretty much just a getaway driver and was not involved really in the crime itself, they tossed his case right out the window and let him go. Trials then did start for the other three, and we'll start with Robert. He pleaded not guilty and ultimately took back his entire confession. He was only charged with the murder of Amy Ayers and was acquitted of all the other charges. He was convicted in 2001 and sentenced to death. Now, almost a year later, Michael Scott's trial would begin, and just like Robert, Michael took back his confession as well. He said that he was forced to say it, and this would be completely supported with the picture that was all over media with the police officer holding a gun to his head. Michael was only charged as well with the murder of Amy Ayers and was sentenced to life in prison. Now comes Mr. Maurice Pierce's turn, the so-called ringleader of it all. In Texas, you cannot be convicted, back then at least, I don't know if it's still the same now, but you cannot be convicted of a crime if the only evidence that they have against you is based solely on the confessions of others. Now, this helped his case immensely. He never really confessed to any of the crimes, so police really didn't have anything else to put against him besides the confessions themselves. So charges against him were eventually dropped and he was let free. So now we have Maurice and Forrest, the two who originally confessed at the time of their arrest when they were juveniles or whatever. Now we're both walking free of charges and were pretty much just let go. Now, a few years later, Robert and Michael both appealed their cases. And in May of 2006, the court overturned Robert's conviction, and not long after that, Michael's conviction was also overturned. They did try to charge the men again for, I believe, the other 3 murders, but they were using the same confessions that they did in the original case, so it really didn't stand. And in June of 2009, a judge would ultimately decide to throw it all out and order both Michael and Robert to be released from custody immediately. October of that year is when all charges were dropped and both men were released. Now, today we have some really amazing technology which would allow them to rerun the DNA evidence that they had. They were able to determine that the DNA that was originally found on Amy was also found on Jennifer. This would mean that both girls were raped by the same suspect. There was also additional DNA found on Sarah, which suggested another male was involved, and then a third based off the DNA that they found on the cloth that was around Eliza's wrist. This could get confusing, but I'll try to keep it simplified as best as I could. So, back when the murder first happened, police questioned Jennifer's boyfriend. Remember? He had stated that he did hang out with Jennifer a few hours before her going to work and that they did have sex. The same strand of male DNA was found both in Jennifer and Amy, and this DNA was his. But experts say that it is possible that whoever raped both girls could have gotten his DNA on him and transferred it in between the girls, or at some weird coincidence, it was transferred when the bodies were piled on top of one another. Her boyfriend was totally cleared of any involvement with this crime, though. In 2017, FBI would actually ding a match in their database, but they never released any details of who the match was and pretty much said that it could still be thousands of other men. So that brings us to today, guys. No person since has been arrested for the murders that happened that night. Amy, Sarah, Eliza, and Jennifer's lives were horrendously taken that evening by an evil, malicious man or men, and we still have yet to find them. I hope my video can shed some light onto this case, and I hope eventually they do catch whoever did this and bring some closure to the friends and family of these 4 girls and the people of Austin. Thank you guys for hanging out with me today. And if you are still here, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and I can't wait to see you guys next time. See you later.